Chairman Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move to adjourn the House of Representatives.
That's a proper motion, proper and second. Would you like to us adjourn for 2 years, or would you like to have a date at some point in the future to come back? Chairman Clemens.
Mr. Speaker, I move to adjourn this body until Monday, 5 p.m.
It's proper motion, proper second. It's non-debatable. We are voting on the motion to adjourn until Monday at 5 p.m. We're on the board. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 23, 73 nays.
Motion is denied. Members in the gallery, that is disruptive behavior. If it continues, we will have to clear the balcony except for the press. That's the one warning. Representative Bolso, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of H.R. number 64.
Representative Bolso moves adoption of House Resolution 64, properly seconded. Representative Bolso, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request that the clerk read the resolution.
Mr. Clerk, read the resolution.
House Resolution 64 by Representative Bolso, a resolution to expel Gloria Johnson from her seat as a member of the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the State of Tennessee, elected by the 90th Representative District. Whereas Article 2, Section 12 of the Tennessee Constitution provides that each House may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3 expel a member, but not a second time for the same offense, and shall have all the powers necessary for a branch of the legislature of a free state. And whereas all members of the House of Representatives must comply with permanent rules of order of Tennessee House of Representatives for the 113th General Assembly, including preserving order, adhering to decorum, speaking only with recognition, not crowding around the clerk's desk, avoiding personalities, and not using props or displaying political messages. And whereas during the House floor session, 19th Legislative Day on March 30th, 2023, Gloria Johnson of Knox County, along with Justin J. Pearson of Shelby County and Justin Jones of Davidson County, did knowingly and intentionally bring disorder and dishonor to the House of Representatives through their individual and collective actions. And whereas at approximately 10:49 a.m., Representative Johnson and her colleagues, having gathered at her desk, moved in unison to the well and began shouting without recognition. And whereas once gathered in the well and called out of order, Representative Johnson and her colleagues proceeded to disrupt proceedings of the House of Representatives from approximately 10:50 a.m. until approximately 11:42 a.m. And whereas during this time, Representative Johnson and her colleagues shouted, pounded the podium, led chants with citizens in the gallery, and generally engaged in disorderly and disruptive conduct, including refusing to leave the well, sitting on the podium, and utilizing a sign displaying a political message. And whereas during this time, Representative Pearson and Representative Jones used the bullhorn to amplify their protestations, and whereas these actions were done in open session in the presence of and witnessed by the members and staff of the House of Representatives, and whereas it appears to be satisfaction of this body that Representative Johnson's conduct on March 30th, 2023 constitutes disorderly behavior and justifies expulsion, and whereas such disorderly behavior on the part of Representative Johnson reflects adversely upon the integrity and dignity of the House of Representatives of the state of Tennessee, places a cloud upon the action of this honorable body, and is inconsistent with the duty of a member of this body, and whereas it is deemed in the best interest of the people of the state of Tennessee and this body for Representative Johnson to relinquish her seat as a member of the House of Representatives, and whereas Representative Johnson has been given advance notice of the contents of this resolution and has been afforded the opportunity to debate the resolution on the floor of this House prior to its passage, now therefore be it resolved by the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee that pursuant to the authority under Article 2, Section 12 of the Tennessee Constitution, this body hereby expels Gloria Johnson from her seat as a member of the House of Representatives of the 113th General Assembly of the state of Tennessee, elected by the 90th Representative District for disorderly behavior occurring on March 30, 2023, and declares the 90th Representative District seat vacant. Be it further resolved that copies of this resolution be prepared and forwarded to Gloria Johnson, the legislative body of Knox County, the Honorable Bill Lee, Governor of the state of Tennessee, and the Honorable Trey Hargett, Secretary of State.
Representative Johnson, you are recognized in the well with your attorneys. All three of you have 20 minutes for comments. Whoever wishes to go first, you're recognized. Mr. Wendell.
Mr. Speaker and members, as a believer, I must recognize that today is Maundy Thursday, the day of betrayal. Let's go straight to the charging instrument. I'd like to direct each of your attention to the next to last paragraph on the first page of House Resolution 64. At approximately 10:49 a.m., Representative Johnson and her colleagues, having gathered at her desk, moved in unison and began shouting without recognition. I challenge the author of this document to come to this well and to tell Tennessee and America that that's a true statement. It is an absolute falsehood that has been perpetrated on this body. This woman did not shout, and that's the first particular that they charged her with. So if the author of this document can come up here, I'll yield the well. Please explain to this woman and to America why you committed a falsehood.
Representative Wendell, you can't ask people that, but who else would like to talk? You have 20 minutes. Is that the end of the opening? Mr. Wendell.
Let's move on to the second part of the bill of particulars. Top paragraph of page 2. Whereas during this time, Representative Johnson and her colleagues shouted. Again, a false statement for the second time, the second allegation, and both are false. Please come up and face the people and explain why you perpetrated a fraud on this woman in the state of Tennessee. Where is the sponsor of this document? It's unconscionable. Whereas during this time, Representative Johnson pounded the podium. Show me where she pounded the podium. Another outright lie. Somebody contradict me in this body. Please, somebody come up and set me straight that the first 3 comments about this woman are true, because it's an absolute falsehood. You just watched it on the video. Democracy is too precious for a supermajority to abuse it. Whereas during this time, Representative Johnson generally engaged in disorderly and disruptive conduct, including refusing to leave the well, sitting on the podium, and utilizing a sign displaying a political message. This is in the conjunctive. Again, an outright lie. She did not display a sign. Isn't it fitting these allegations are made during Holy Week? The author of this document should apologize not to her, but to the state of Tennessee. This is an outright fraud and an abomination in the United States of America. And not this is Tennessee's watching, America's watching. And I'll yield the podium anytime any member of this chamber wants to come up and defend this heinous action. This document is not only inaccurate, it's an outright distortion of her conduct. Any sessions court in the state of Tennessee, in all 95 counties, would dismiss this on a simple motion, but this body is going to take it seriously and try to oust somebody and subvert the will of the voters of Knoxville, Tennessee. I mean, do you know who Gloria Johnson is? Does anybody know her? I mean, who is Gloria Johnson? Is she the boogeyman? I mean, Gloria Johnson's a school teacher, a public school teacher, a special education school teacher. She's a sister, she's a daughter, she's an American, she's a Tennessean, she's a Farragut graduate, she's a graduate of the University of Tennessee, and a Girl Scout. Let me tell you what this lady is not. She's not a felon. She's not a misdemeanor. She's not a sex offender. She's not a target of a federal grand jury investigation. She's never had a single ethics violation, not one time in her service to Tennessee. She's simply put, she's never broken the public trust. Never, not one time. Many of you in this room, including me, do not agree with her political stances. Many of you don't. Some of you do, many don't. However, she doesn't work for you. She works for the people who live on Broadway, Nadine, Washington Avenue, and West Hills. Those are the people that sent her here, and the author of this document wants to take falsehoods and subvert the will of 70,000 voters. I'm sure most of you are going to be surprised that you vote with this woman 80% of the time. 80% of the time, the members of this body vote exactly the way she votes. America was born to protest. Thank the good Lord it was. 1688, the Germantown Quaker protest. 1773, the Tea Party. 1791, the Whiskey Rebellion. 1863, the New York City draft riots. 1913, right here, women's suffrage. 1963, March on D.C. 1969, protest against the Vietnam War. 1970, Kent State. 1973, the March for Life. 2009, the Tea Party protest. And 2011, Occupy Wall Street. I submit to this body that this document is absolute fraud. And whoever votes for it is going to perpetrate a fraud on America. This is democracy at stake. Please be aware. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, members of the House, the proposal before you represents a dangerous turn entirely without precedent in the history of our great state. You just heard the charging document against Representative Johnson contains statements that are just not true. I would respectfully urge you to step back from this brink. President Reagan called democracy the most deeply honorable government ever devised by man. Each of you is here because you convinced your people, voter by voter, that you are best suited to be the guardians of their hopes and dreams. The same is true for the people who elected Representative Johnson and the other representatives for whom expulsion motions have been filed. You each know personally how hard it is to get elected, how seriously our best citizens take that process, how important it is that the people's will expressed in lawful elections be carried out. If anything, you know that our Tennessee Constitution protects the people's will, enforces democracy even more than its national counterpart. What has been proposed today is nothing less than the cancellation of the studied decisions of thousands of Tennessee voters. The charge today, the only charge, is that Representative Johnson and the other members violated the House rules. I, like you, have lived by those rules. Now, today I've heard what happened called a mutiny. Give me a break. Any of you that have served in this body more than a handful of months knows that when tempers are high, rules are bent, rules are broken. I have personally been in this chamber when on multiple occasions members came to blows, when members took videos improperly in violation of the rules. I have been here when members were locked in the chamber, when the speaker had to gavel down members who were directly against the rules, engaging in personal insults. I have been in this chamber when a member was so fearful he had to be guarded by a group of state troopers. In none of these situations did anyone ever even suggest that because the rules had been violated, there should be a significant sanction for a member. No, they just returned the chamber to calm and the chamber got back onto its business. Certainly no one ever suggested the ultimate sanction that you are proposing today. Often, these sorts of things I described happen, as here, when the body is confronting highly charged, critical issues. For Tennesseans, the Covenant School shooting is not just a national tragedy, it's a personal issue. For us in Nashville, we know these people, we know the victims or their teachers or their friends. Representative Johnson's a teacher. As many of you know, she spends an enormous amount of time counseling and working with teachers here in Nashville and elsewhere. For her, the events at the school were a crushing personal tragedy, a huge burden. We saw a tape today as represents the complete lack of due process in this particular proceeding. We've never gotten a straight answer about who took that tape that we were provided. But what did it show? It showed some members came to a well almost immediately. I hear after 5 seconds a recess was called. The members came to the well. Representative Johnson stood here, did not shout, as is stated, did not pound at the table, and after a short period of time engaged in a discussion with leadership and then peaceably left the chamber. Nobody was hurt. Nobody was threatened. This is the sort of situation that has often occurred on the floor of this House, and no one has ever suggested these grave sanctions. Expulsion under these circumstances, as all of you know, would have no precedent in Tennessee or elsewhere. In Tennessee, the sanction of expulsion has been reserved always for the worst of the worst sort of behavior, for taking a bribe, for being involved in multiple incidents of sexual misconduct. In Tennessee, expulsion has always involved a lengthy process of investigation where witnesses were interviewed, where committees were formed to evaluate the charges. What's happening here, both procedurally and given the accusations, has no precedent whatsoever in the history of this state. And members, our historic treatment of expulsion reflects the treatment throughout the United States. I heard some members suggest that what we're doing is lawful, what you're doing is lawful, what you're doing is consistent with the law, with precedent. Completely not true. In 2020, the Idaho House expelled a member. What for? for conspiring to defraud the U.S. government after conviction. In 2018, an Arizona representative was expelled for engaging in a pattern of sexual harassment over many, many years. In New York, assemblymen have been expelled when they were convicted of felonies like wire fraud, mail fraud. In Massachusetts, a representative in 2014 was expelled after being convicted of assaulting a woman who declined to have sexual relations with him. These are the sorts of grave and criminal activities that have resulted in this sort of extraordinary sanction. I haven't heard anybody on this floor cite a single example of somebody being expelled from a legislative body based on these sort of flimsy charges. This is not just unprecedented in the state of Tennessee, it has no precedent in the United States of America. You can read the proposed resolution. The behavior at issue is that Representative Johnson was standing in the well trying to process with the citizens of this state a horrific attack on a school just down the road. That's what she's accused of doing. Step back for a moment. Can anybody seriously suggest that expulsion from this body is an appropriate sanction for that activity? Members, I'd urge you to pause. This proposal has come very precipitously. In contrast to past expulsions, organized by speakers of both parties, there's been no organized investigation. No committee has been formed. No testimony has been taken. Apparently, nobody even bothered to proofread the charging document to see whether it applied to each particular individual. The press accounts that have been the basis for most persons' understanding of what happened have at times painted an accurate and incomplete picture. They should not be the basis for action by this body. Decisions of this extraordinary gravity should be made, if at all, after a thoughtful investigation and evaluation. Proceeding now without such an investigation is totally unnecessary and completely out of odds with the normal functioning of this body. Tennesseans from Cordell Hull to Fred Thompson to Diane Nash have so often led the fight to protect the rule of law and enforce and protect our freedoms. Make no mistake, expulsion under these circumstances for each individual proposed to be expelled is a grave departure from this tradition. It will damage this body. It will damage the reputation of the Tennessee legislature. Many of you are fully aware that citizens of both parties are shocked at what is occurring today. These accused members have committed no crime, no act of moral turpitude. Their actions bear no relationship to the sort of actions for which expulsion has traditionally been used. You all took a pledge this morning. You pledged to uphold our form of government. You have pledged when you join this body to uphold the law. That means exercising the power granted to you by the people in a manner that makes sense, that's informed by the facts before you, and that doesn't just entirely depart from the law as it has always been applied. Voting to cancel 3 lawful elections, doing so without any meaningful investigation, is the opposite of upholding the law. This is the ultimate dangerous precedent, and it puts every member's seat at risk. A vote for expulsion under the present circumstances is a vote against due process. It's a vote against the longstanding traditions of this body, against the rule of law, against freedom of expression, and most importantly, entirely against the will of the people. These votes will make our state the opposite of a city on of a city on the hill. Step back, reconsider. Don't add your support for this lawless, arbitrary, completely unprecedented action. I, Representative Wendell, and Representative Johnson will be available to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Wendell, the rule to suspend was only Representative Johnson would be able to take questions. Your role was limited to just comments under when we suspended the rules. Representative Bolso, you're recognized.
Representative, the resolution states that at approximately 10:49 a.m., you and your colleagues gathered at your desk. That is a true statement, correct?
Representative Johnson.
I'm not certain on the time, but that's probably right, or very close.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The resolution goes on that you and your colleagues moved in unison to the well. That also is a true statement, correct?
Representative Johnson.
Yes, we did walk to the well together.
Representative Bolso.
You. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The resolution goes on that you and your colleagues began shouting without recognition. That is true, correct?
Representative Johnson.
No, sir, that is not true. This resolution is my understanding. It's about me. I went to the well and I did not speak. And as a matter of fact, I will say that when my colleagues spoke, they were not yelling because this microphone was on. And as long as this microphone was on, and I don't even remember which colleague it was, I stood with them. But as long as this microphone was on, they spoke to the microphone and did not yell. When the microphone was cut and the speaker called recess, I think that's when the megaphone came out. But I absolutely never yelled. This is about me as I understand it with this resolution.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's just walk through it slowly. You will agree that your two colleagues, one from Shelby County, one from Davidson County, used a bullhorn to address the gallery, correct?
Representative Johnson.
It is correct that a small megaphone was used, and yes, I stood with my colleagues, but the video showed what I was doing.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the video shows that you were chanting with your colleagues, correct?
Representative Johnson.
I believe that the charges were that I was yelling and I was not yelling.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But my question, Representative, was this. Do you agree that you were in the well chanting?
Representative Johnson.
I agree that I was in the well, but I can tell you that my voice was no louder than the members having conversations all around this room during the recess.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, let's put volume to one side. We saw on the videotape, did we not, that you were chanting, quote, "Enough is enough," close quote.
Representative Johnson.
That's probably true, yes, but it was not yelling, and my voice was no louder than the conversations going on in this room, even occasionally some yelling a little bit across the floor to each other. That was also going on. I stood with my colleagues. I stand with my colleagues. And we may have broken a House rule coming to the well, but much of this document is false.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You will agree that you also were chanting from the well, quote, "Power to the people," close quote, and, quote, "No action, no peace," close quote. You chanted both of those slogans from the well, correct?
Representative Johnson.
What I'm going to say to you is I did not speak in a voice louder than any other member on this floor. You may Make of it what you will.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, we can certainly agree on this. You were speaking from the well without having been recognized by the Speaker, correct?
Representative Johnson.
During the recess, yes, we did that.
Representative Bolso.
You also agree that you approached the well without recognition from the Speaker, correct?
Representative Johnson.
As I said, I may have broken a rule in approaching the well, but much
Hang on, she gets to continue. Representative Johnson.
much of what is in this document is false.
Representative McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a sad day that I rise, but I'm going to start out really trying to focus on the positive. I'm from Knox County, as is Representative Johnson. I may call her Gloria because we're friends. But for those of you all that don't know, and I like the fact that Representative from Williamson County brought it up, you know, her campaign tag is standing tall. And that's what she does. That's kind of who she is. She's not loud, she's not long, but she stands. And so, you know, she stood through keeping her hands up for 45 minutes and not getting recognized prior to me coming on. She stood through not having an office, having an office literally in a closet, to having the smallest office known to man for a lady that is of significant height. She stood through that and she continued to serve because that's where her heart is. Her heart is about, you know, service, and that's what she does. We've had a lot go on here. And you know, folks are holding this meeting today, or the actual calendar, up as this is the way we should do business. And you're right. This ain't what we've been doing all year. I want the folks listening, if you saw today's regular session, this is not how we're treated. Our biggest problem that we've had is just shutting our voice off. We've been begging you all, don't shut our voice off. You know, when you take clothes and you put them in a washing machine, hot or cold water, it's not the water that cleans the clothes. And that's what we've been saying. We've been sitting in water. It's the agitation that gets the results. I don't condone what happened, but it is not worth expelling a member that represents 70,000 people. It's not worth that. Gloria and I are unique compared to the other three and from our county. Plans are being made already by our mayor, W.W.E. Kane, to usurp the process and bring a Republican down. That's not fair. Gloria won her district double digit. President Biden won he won that district double digit. But that's what's going to happen. Is that fair? Why am I saying that? Actions have consequences. Hopefully unintended consequences. But I'm letting you know that's a consequence. She's not from Knoxville. My freshman year, we had another colleague from Knox County come and just, I don't have words for it, came with an asinine Hillsdale College explanation of how the Monroe document was actually a good thing for African Americans. And the next day, I'm on national news radio, on television, and you know what I did? I showed the man grace. I could have thrown him directly under the bus, but I didn't. And he actually thanked me for that. People make mistakes. He realizes that that's a mistake today, but he was shown grace. We had another member, when there was another ruckus, saying, put him on a leash. One of my African-American, soon-to-be expelled colleagues. That was wrong. I didn't make a big deal out of it. Went to that man on man, and said, hey, that's not right. We had a conversation about it. But what we're doing today is just, it's horrific. It is horrific. And I beg you, I'm pleading with you, do not continue with this process. We need sound minds, and we need representation. In Representative Johnson's case, her district would not be represented properly.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I appreciate that's very true. The comments you made about how many times my voice has been silenced as long as I've been here, raising my hand for 45 minutes on the floor and not being called on. I was actually told by the speaker that was in retaliation for some of the thing he thought was incorrect that I did. And when I was the lone vote against a Republican speaker, I was moved to a closet-sized office and had to stay there for a year. It was during COVID. There was no room to social distance. I couldn't have someone in my office, couldn't close the door, had no work table for the people who came up from my district. You're not silencing my voice. You're silencing the voice of 70,000 Tennesseans that sent me here, that care deeply about gun violence and Medicaid expansion and public schools. And we are continually silenced on the floor on those issues and more. And today, my colleague is right. Today does not look anything like every other day in the legislature. With all of these cameras here across the country, we're all getting allowed to speak, and there's a little more debate on the issues, and this is great. If this is how we behaved every day, maybe my colleagues could have spoken from our desks on an issue that is so incredibly important. You all, I'm just going to bet none of you have been in a classroom waiting for your class to come in, preparing your classroom, when you see a door open up at the cafeteria, children running down the hall, running down the hill. I had an outdoor classroom, screaming, crying, in terror. Kids I didn't even know also ran into my classroom because that's who I was. People in the school who I didn't have in class came to me for comfort. And I stood there trying to figure out what happened because they couldn't even articulate it for quite a bit of time, and found out that one of our students was shot and killed in the cafeteria while everyone was there, including the police, including the principals, including our other security. And I spent that day comforting those children, waiting for their parents to come and pick them up. And when my kids all got picked up, I went up to the circle and stood there, I don't even remember how many hours that day, until every child, we connected every child with every parent. And you're just in shock, you're moving in shock. The trauma on those faces, you will never, ever forget. I don't want to forget it. And if I'm not allowed to speak that issue, that is why I walked up to this well, to stand with my other colleagues who were tired of having their voices cut off when we are trying to speak about violence in our classrooms, violence in our churches, violence in our restaurants and our grocery stores. I have to raise the voice of the people in my district. And I did what I felt those folks wanted me to do. It's not a secret. My folks sent me here because they know I'm a fighter. They know I will fight for them. My friends in school all call me Little Miss Law and Order because I'm a rule follower. And I know that rules sometimes have to be broken, and sometimes you have to get in good trouble, as another one of my colleagues said. And I felt that this issue was in my heart. It was compelling me to come forward and address this issue. And I stood with my colleagues, and they are great at making people understand and making people listen. And I stood with them, and they were a voice for me. And I stood with them because we all feel our voices are being silenced, and something had to be said.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You stated just a few minutes ago, Representative, that the facts set out in the resolution were false. Let me just explore that with you a little more, if I could. The resolution goes on and says that once you and your colleagues gathered in the well, that you were called out of order. That is a true statement, correct?
Representative Johnson.
I remember, I guess they gavelled out of order. I don't remember. I remember the mic being cut. That's the thing that I remember most.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, if in fact the videotape shows that you got to the well and were gavelled out of order by the Speaker, you would not dispute that, correct?
Representative Johnson.
What is my crime, sir? What? You continue to ask this question. I think we've been through it over and over and over. I came to the well. I stood with my colleagues. I fought for my constituents in a quiet, non-desk pounding, whatever it said about holding up signs or whatever. But I came here and I stood because I did it for the kids in my district, for the kids in the state, for the kids in this community. And you are continually asking the same question. You're going to get the same answer.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, I'm simply exploring a claim you made here that the facts in this resolution are false. And my last question was simply whether, in fact, it was true that once you got to the well, the videotape shows that you were gavelled out of order. Now, if the videotape shows that, you do not dispute that, correct?
Representative Johnson.
I think I've answered that question. I've explained it over and over. You are beating a dead horse. What is my crime?
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the resolution continues that after you were gavelled out of order, that you proceeded to disrupt the proceedings of the House of Representatives. That is a true statement, correct?
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, it is not. We were in recess, and we stood up here for a few more minutes after recess, and then we went and left the floor. So during recess, we were standing up here. You are correct. But it was recess, and we weren't in session.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me approach it this way. Representative, you agree that your conduct violated House rules, correct?
Representative Johnson.
I may have gone to the well without permission, but the charges in this statement are false.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it simply a fact, Representative, that you did violate the House rules?
Representative Johnson.
Isn't it simply a fact that I answered that? I may have broken the rule when I went to the House floor, but most of the facts in this are not true.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When you went to the well and spoke without recognition in violation of House rules, you expected to be disciplined. Isn't that true?
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't speak when I went to the well. I'm not really sure what you're referring to.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it true, Representative, that you expected to be disciplined for your conduct on March the 30th?
Representative Johnson.
I don't know. I knew that it was possible because I did understand the rule. However, I have seen far, far worse in this body. I have talked to colleagues. I actually saw former Representative McCormick the other day, and I also saw, I remember a conversation with Representative Ryan Haynes where he told me when he was getting sworn in and his mom and family were sitting beside him and someone started coming and banging on the desk and everything was jumping and going crazy, it scared his mom to death.
Representative King.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I want to pose a question to my colleagues. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to have representatives come in here not knowing all of the information that is being proposed against them, and to have this procedure where we, in a sense, making it on the fly as to what is appropriate and what is inappropriate? Now, I'm asking, I keep hearing violating rules. I don't remember them hitting anybody or anything of that nature. But if we think about it, I believe at one time or another, we all have violated rules within this body. And asking my colleagues once again, what are we getting out of it? I mean, if we don't have our way, you're wrong. Think about it. We have to not just think about it, but look at it from the viewpoint of the perspective of a person who is not in agreement with you. If we're going to be fair and equitable, we need to see it from the eyes of the other person. My colleagues, 3 of them, were responding to the changes that many citizens feel that we need to consider, gun laws. And what I'm saying is that mothers, fathers, their children, suburbs, in the rural communities, and in the cities, I believe they are saying to this body, not just we want a change, there has to be a change if we're going to deal with the safety and security of the children of this state. And in my view, my colleagues were responding to that need. And what are we here for if we're not striving to respond to the needs of our people? And, you know, should we give consideration to closing our eyes and saying, if it's a person down the street from me who's been shot, is it a member of my family who's been shot? Would I react in the same manner that is being proposed right now? One of our colleagues, you've already removed from this body. So I'm saying that many of us in this body espouse to be children of God, our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Now, I strive to say that's the head of my life. That is my leader. And you know, there's this little band that people used to have on their wrist. What would Jesus do? Are we doing that in which our Lord and Savior would do to that average person? We need each other. There are so many perils in this world, and we think we've got it made. We're in control. The world will bend to what it is we want it to be. That's not reality. And I would ask that we give consideration to what they were responding to, the concerns of children in letters that have been sent not only to myself but to others, afraid to go back to school. Parents afraid to leave their children at school. We are all in this together. And, you know, it's interesting that we have not found a way of sitting down, talking about the reality of coming together to make those necessary changes for our citizens. Remind you, we are in this together, and what is being done here today does not bring us any closer together. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that, and I appreciate you bringing up that others have broken rules. Well, just this week on Monday night, what looked like a Monday night football brawl, and you know, when there's a bad call on the field, we had members in here, one who shoved one and stole his phone, and people were having to separate members from each other. Actual physical contact, actual folks coming in, shoving someone, stealing their phone, and having to pull people apart. And it's remarkable to me that that's not being talked about, but this 6 or 7 minute disturbance up here, that whatever you want to call it, what we call coming to the well to lift the voices of the people that we serve, the voices of my district, where more than 50% of the Republicans in my district want red flag laws. More than 50%. An overwhelming majority of all parties in my district want red flag laws. They want safe storage laws. They want universal background checks and closing loopholes. I was bringing their voice to this body, and it felt like the only way possible that day was to join my colleagues and make sure that the people outside, the thousands who would come, the mothers that I talked to before I came in that told me they had dropped off their kids that morning before coming here, were in tears about the safety of their children, how hard it was for them to drop off their kids. And I understood what they meant because I saw the faces that day, August 21st in 2008, where parents were coming in, where we lost one of our special ed students, Ryan McDonald, who was always a cut-up. Lost him that day. A lot of friends lost a friend. A lot of teachers lost a student that they loved. And certainly his family miss him still every single day. And there's not a day that goes by when I'm sitting in a school for whatever reason. I am retired, but I'm in schools a lot. I'll be sitting in a school and I'll hear a siren. Because the next thing I heard after all the kids came running down to my classroom and kind of was just figuring out what was happening, just a rush of sirens. Every single day now, if I'm in a school and I hear a siren, I jump. Every single time. Because you just never get that out of your head. We can do something about this. We are the only country in the world with this type of gun violence problem. We all know what some of the solutions are. We have seen, we have the data. There are things that we can do. And my voters sent me here to speak specifically to that issue because that was one of the things that I heard on thousands of doorsteps for a year.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, will you agree that your conduct on March 30th was wrongful?
Representative Johnson.
My conduct on that day was what I felt compelled in my heart to do for my constituents. That is your answer, sir.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will you agree, Representative, that your conduct on March the 30th constituted disorderly behavior?
Representative Johnson.
I don't think I'm going to agree with you on anything, quite frankly. I mean, we've voted the same a lot of time in this body, but what I'm going to agree to is that I may have broken a rule, but the words in this document are false, and I did what I was compelled to do based on speaking for the voters in my district who were begging me to bring this issue forward.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me move to a different topic, Representative, regarding coordination. Before the session began on March 30, you and the other two representatives had discussed your plans to occupy the well, correct?
Representative Johnson.
That is absolutely incorrect.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You intended to disrupt the House proceedings that morning, correct?
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That is, Mr. Speaker, that is absolutely incorrect.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You knew and expected that the Speaker would cut off the microphone in the well, correct?
Representative Johnson.
As he cuts off our microphones a lot, I thought that was possible, yes.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And is that why you and your colleagues brought a megaphone to the well?
Representative Johnson.
Is this resolution about my colleagues or is this about me?
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Did you have difficulty understanding the question, Representative?
Representative Johnson.
Oh, I understand pretty well.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Are you the person who brought the bullhorn into the chamber?
Representative Johnson.
Thank you so much for that question. I am so happy you asked that. I absolutely did not. A lot of you folks passed a lot of gossip around about where that megaphone came from, and let's just talk about it right now. Because a friend of mine came in the morning and walked with me through the tunnel, and she didn't know if the protesters were going to be inside or outside. Her name is Margot Price. You might have heard of her. Anyway, we got upstairs and the protest was not indoors, so she said, well, I want to go outside where the protest is. And I said, well, here, you're going to want your megaphone out there. So at the doors, I handed her her megaphone and she went outside. Later, she messaged me and she says she's coming back up. I know I can't bring my megaphone in. Can you put it in your scooter? And I said, absolutely. And so we put the megaphone in the scooter. I talked to two troopers who watched me do it, and they watched me put it, and they said to me, would you please not get that out the rest of the day? And I said, absolutely, to them. The megaphone was this big. It had an attached microphone. So much for the gossip. That megaphone never left my scooter. It's on my office now. If anybody would like to go down and look for prints, it'll have my prints and Miss Margot Price prints on it.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Based on your responses, Representative, it seems that you do not view your conduct as wrongful, and that if you thought it appropriate, there might be another occasion when you'll take the well without the permission of the Speaker and hijack House proceedings. Isn't that true?
Representative Johnson.
you know, you're reading minds again, and it's happened a couple of times today. I'm trying to be as respectful as possible, but I don't like to have my mind read. And if we conduct business like we have today, where people get to speak, I don't think it'll ever happen again, to be quite honest. Because when people are allowed to talk, when people are allowed to speak up for the folks that sent them here, then we can get things done. We can come to the table. We can talk about the importance of protecting kids' lives, not after the guns come to the schoolhouse, to the gym, or to the library, or wherever it all happens, but before the guns ever get to the doors. Prevent gun violence in schools. It seems like some people here almost want tanks and they want security. They want this violence at our schools. We need to make sure those guns don't get there. And that's what we need to be talking about.
Representative Shaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I rise, first of all, to say that I've been around here long enough to know that when we have these long discussions, we pretty well know how the vote's going to turn out before we ever vote. So I don't think I need to guess how this vote will turn out. But I rise to speak on behalf of myself, Representative Pearson, Representative Johnson, Representative Jones, and all of us in this chamber. I want to share just a little quick story with you all. And I didn't rise to point fingers at who is right and who's wrong in those things, but I just want to share a story that I read that will eventually affect all of us. You may get it by the time you get home. It may be tomorrow, it may be next week, it might even be next year, next 2 years. But there's a story in the Bible about Jesus coming down from the mountain early in the morning. And when he arrives at the temple, and I'm sure many of you read this, these men said to him, "Master, we caught this woman in adultery in the very act." And we know what the law of Moses says. The law of Moses says, stone her, kill her. But what do you say? The Bible says Jesus wrote something on the ground. And when he wrote that on the ground, the oldest, including all the youngest of those men, start walking out the room. And Jesus asked that woman who was caught in the very act of adultery, "Where is thine accusers?" And she said, "I have none." And he said, "Neither do I. Go and sin no more." Thank you.
Representative Jernigan.
Thank you, Speaker. Representative Johnson, did you hold up a sign?
Representative Johnson.
No, I did not.
Representative Jernigan.
Did you pound the table?
Representative Johnson.
No, I did not.
Representative Jernigan.
Did you yell?
Representative Johnson.
No, sir.
Representative Jernigan.
Members, during the opening remarks, Colonel Wendell went through a couple of falsehoods, and he challenged every member on this body to dispute it. And there was silence, crickets, including from the sponsors of the resolution, who did not dispute it. But when it came time, when opening statements were over with, The sponsor, the first thing he did was get rid of the lawyers. Now, I don't know. I wouldn't want to be up against Colonel Wendell or Captain Stewart either. But I've yet to hear anyone challenge those falsehoods that are in this resolution. We can't vote on a resolution that's poorly written. So I would ask you and urge you to vote no on expelling her, because this resolution is poorly written. It cannot be defended, and there is just too many falsehoods within it. Thank you.
Representative Bolso.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, you've heard several references to the Bible this morning, primarily from the New Testament. And one thing that is significant is that forgiveness always follows contrition. It always follows penance. It follows someone taking responsibility for conduct. What you've heard here this afternoon from the representative from Knox County is not contrition. She's not even willing to agree with me on anything, that her conduct was disorderly or that she disrupted the proceedings. She wouldn't even agree not to do it again. That's why this issue of forgiveness does not factor into the equation this afternoon at all. What you've heard from these representatives who are the subject of the resolutions is that they believe what they did was right, and we have no guarantee whatsoever that they're not going to do it again. We have an obligation to protect the integrity of this body. What we saw on March the 30th had not happened, so far as anyone can remember, at any time in the prior 227 years of our state's history. That's point number one. Forgiveness follows contrition. It follows penance. We have neither. And then secondly, with regard to the facts, we've heard these broad statements that the facts contained in the resolution are inaccurate. And I think we've demonstrated that's not true. Because I walked through with the representative the first 5 or 6 facts in the resolution, and she agreed that they were all true. And then we got to a point that she wouldn't answer the questions anymore. Because as we continue to walk through the resolution, what we see is exactly what was evidenced by the videotape. We see that they proceeded to disrupt the proceedings. We see that collectively, this representative and the other 2 pounded on the podium, led chants with citizens in the gallery, and generally engaged in disorderly and disruptive conduct. That's exactly what they did. They are all 3 in this together. They acted in unison. They acted in concert. One is just as responsible for the parts of the disruption as the other. That is what is in the nature of coordinated conduct or a conspiracy. Each member is responsible for the conduct of the conspiracy as a whole. They approached the well in unison. They disrupted the proceedings in unison. They are responsible together. And then the resolution goes on that these representatives generally engaged in disorderly and disruptive conduct, including refusing to leave the well, sitting on the podium, and using a sign displaying a political message. We saw every bit of that in the video. Collectively, these 3 did every one of those things. And collectively, that unquestionably constitutes disorderly behavior in violation of Article 2, Section 12 of our Constitution. And so the question, members, whether these representatives remain in the House or whether we put them outside the House, they have already answered for us. They, by their conduct, voluntarily put themselves outside of the Constitution. They put themselves outside of the rule. They are unrepentant about it. They're willing, apparently, to do it again. They tried to shred our Constitution with a bullhorn, but it did not work. We had a speaker and a Constitution that was too strong. It's been here since 1796, and I urge every member to uphold the Constitution and vote in favor of the resolution. Thank you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, my colleague I'm not sure how many times, was reading my mind again, put words in my mouth and said things that I never said. That might be what he extrapolated from my words, from something, but that is absolutely not something I said. I'm not going to agree with a lot of his terminology because it's not factually based. If you wanted to collectively address us, then you should have put us all in the same resolution. But instead, you chose to separate out the members. So if a resolution was written well, it would have addressed my behavior, because according to this is a resolution about my consequences.
Representative Clemens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly have empathy for my colleague from Williamson County, because I know what it's like to try a lawsuit with a witness who doesn't answer the way that you want them to answer a question. It's easy in a lawsuit because an objection is available, because asked and answered is an objection. In here, unfortunately, in this body, we only have a limited time, but just because you ask the same question 15 times and don't get the answer you want doesn't mean the facts change. Every member of this body, or every member who's a subject of a resolution today for expulsion, must be judged on their own merits. Every single resolution. She can't be held responsible. Representatives can't be held responsible for the conduct of another member. You can only vote based on what she did. The record thus far simply proves that Representative Johnson walked from there to there. And you want to expel her for that? She did not raise her voice. She did not yell. She did not pound the desk. She did not hold a megaphone. She didn't have a button on. She did nothing. She walked from there to there. And ladies and gentlemen, the only rule in our rules that speaks to this is no crowding about the clerk's desk. Members shall not crowd or stand about the clerk's desk. Well, every one of us is guilty of that. Everybody in here has walked up here without permission from the speaker or from anybody and stood up here, talked to the clerk, or when somebody else was introducing a bill. You don't expel someone for that. That's the only fact that has been proven. And you can't hold collectively. That's not a standard. That's not the standard to which she's supposed to be judged. You can't judge her for what others did. Her conduct. It's her conduct should be judged on the merits. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, we had to suspend the rules for every part of this process today. That's because our rules don't even speak or lay out a process for this type of conduct, because it's that rare. We never even think we're going to have to use it, so we don't even put rules in place to govern this. That's why we had to suspend the rules, because it is an extraordinary event reserved for extraordinarily bad conduct. Walking from there to there does not rise to the level of expulsion. And that's the only fact that has been proven today. Now, I'm limited on time here, but ultimately, I don't know if you're upset about the message that was trying to be conveyed. I don't know if you're mad at the messenger. I've heard many of you say in reference to Representative Johnson that you can't be an activist and a legislator. Well, guess what? That's not your decision to make. It's the people of Knox County's decision to make what type of legislator they want representing them. You don't get to make that decision. At the worst, At the worst, you were inconvenienced for a few minutes on that day, and apparently that seems to be grounds for expulsion. This whole process is disrespectful of the rule of law. It's disrespectful of the victims of gun violence, who we should be discussing today rather than this nonsense. It's disrespectful of the cause of so many deaths across our community. We should be spending this time of legislation to protect our communities. But instead, you're asking to expel somebody for walking from there to there. Now, in this last minute I have, I want to tell you this. You may not agree with Representative Johnson. You may not get along with Representative Johnson. Trust me, Representative Johnson has given me the what's what more than any of you can ever dream of. And rightfully so. But let me tell you, I have 24 members, 23 now, and you were looking to expel one more, one of only 2 women in my caucus, a woman, a teacher, and a woman who has the biggest heart of anybody in this body. You are depriving this body of her perspective. She drove some of you to tears weeks ago, and that voice is necessary, and you want to silence it. Shame on you.
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think that one thing that we have to look at, I'm 60 years old, and my colleagues are much younger. The younger generation, I am so proud of. I love them, I love working with them, and I trust that they are going to make a change. And we're starting to see that change in this body, and I stand with them. We may not do things exactly the same. The younger generation is not going to do things the same way that all of us do, of 1 and 2 generations down the road. But they're strong, they're going to fight, they are smart, they are amazing speakers, and they connect with their voters. And they connect with their voters by speaking directly to them. And they did that during a recess. And I was there with them, and I stood with them because our hearts were the same. Our hearts were there for our constituents who cared deeply, for the children that begged us to do something to protect them. I was out there at 7 a.m., conversations all morning with moms and kids, people, staff at Covenant that I wasn't able to recognize on the floor that had reached out to me because I was a teacher. And we just have to do something. And as long as we are not allowed the voice to represent our districts on an issue so critically important that has impacted my life. I went to Denver, Colorado in 2001, the year after Columbine, to take a job at Dakota Ridge High School, which was about 2 miles away from Columbine. And some of the kids from Columbine who could not go back into that school went to Dakota Ridge. Some went to Chatfield, which was about 2 miles in another direction. I was at Dakota Ridge. When I got there, I saw the trauma that these kids had been through. I wrote a program. I wrote a grant for a program very similar to a program we had in Knoxville that addressed mental health. It did wonders. We had a counselor, we had a psychologist, and we were able to help those kids. And we are looking for solutions so that it never happens again. It should never, ever happen again for any parent, for any child, for any classroom. And many of my colleagues walk past those folks without ever making eye contact with them. I cried with them that morning. I told them that I understood. I told them we would lift their voices and try to get something of substance done, something that would keep the guns from never getting to the schoolhouse doors. And that is why I walked to the front with my colleagues who felt the same, because their generation is a generation that has come up in this gun violence. I'm going to stand with them. I've seen it. I've heard them. I've tried to work with them. We can do better. We are better than this, Tennessee. We are. We can acknowledge that there are things that we can do to get guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. There's plenty of research out there. We can do that by having those discussions. But folks weren't even willing to recognize those folks, who they were, why they were here, and tell them, we see you, we hear you, and we care about making your communities and your schools safer.
Representative Doggett.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move previous question.
Previous question been called. Is there objection? There's objection. We're on the board. We're voting on previous question. All those in favor of previous question, vote aye. When the bell rings, those opposed, vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye 71, 23 nays.
Previous question prevails. Representative Johnson has 5 minutes to close.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I want to say some names. Evelyn, Hallie, William, Cynthia, Catherine, Mike, Ryan McDonald. I've spent much of my life dedicated to helping children. Appreciate you guys. You just made me get teary-eyed. And I really want to thank you for standing with me, because I know you care about children. And I hear a lot of talk about caring about children, but I continue to hear no one having conversations about things that will prevent gun violence from coming to our doors. There are so many things we could do that would change the trajectory of where we're headed. More school shootings, more church shootings, more Waffle House shootings, all of these, theater shootings. It's happening everywhere, folks. There's one common denominator. It's the guns. It's the people that have the guns, because we are not doing anything to make sure that people who are not safe don't have guns. I'm a gun owner. I have a gun. I took a class so that I would know how to use that gun. I trained with my nephews, a Marine and an Air Force member. I shoot regularly because I think you have to be responsible. It's responsibly stored. It was my father's service revolver. It laid on his dresser every night when he came home, and we didn't touch it. And we knew not to touch it. But we grew up with that. But my father believed in things that we can do to prevent gun violence. My Marine nephew came home from losing his best friend in Afghanistan, went to live with his best friend's family because they were without their child in Massachusetts. And his business was manufacturing guns in Massachusetts. He told me about the restrictions that they had there And he said, as a gun manufacturer, these are protecting us. These are protecting kids. I sat down with him for hours to talk about what things made sense to you guys as manufacturers and what things did you think were a bridge too far. Not only did he talk to me about it, but he collectively got online with a lot of his colleagues in the same sort of business and sought agreement from all of them. This is the way we get to solutions. But we've got to have those conversations. We have got to be allowed to stand up and speak for our constituents. And we have to welcome this younger generation who might do it a little bit differently, but they are fighting like hell for their constituents. And that's what they sent them here for. That's what they're doing. It's going to look different, you guys. The next generation always does. Respect the human dignity of every citizen in the state of Tennessee, and not just the ones that look like you, and not just the ones that agree with you. We've done so much damage up here to vulnerable communities this year, and now we're doing damage by not addressing the concerns of the families and the children. I cannot tell you how many phone calls I got from Republicans and Democrats and independents from my district saying thank you. And from outside of my district in Knox County, from many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisles districts, Republicans I heard from. We want action. Our hearts compelled us to come up here for action. We need to allow people to speak for the 70,000 folks that sent them here. And earlier when my colleague said 200,000, he was talking about the combined total of the three of us. That's what he was talking about. So be careful about putting words in people's mouth. I have words.
Thank you. We are voting on House Resolution 64. All those in favor vote aye when the bell rings. Those opposed vote no. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? Has everybody voted? Does anybody wish to change their vote? Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Aye 65, 30 nays.
House Resolution 64 fails.